Hi, everyone, and welcome to the pilot episode of May the Spark Be With You, a creativity podcast, the pilot episode. And today is just going to be a bit of an intro of my ideas for this podcast going forward. And there's going to be some talk about writing, the books I'm reading, knitting, a fair bit of knitting, and a little bit of sewing, and probably a couple of other things in between. So I would love it if you would grab a cup of tea and sit down and join me for a bit. So my general idea or inspiration for starting this podcast has been a lot of the knitting podcasts that I've been watching lately. My mom and I have been catching up on a lot of them. And the first one that we really started watching was the Bakery Bears podcast with Dan and Kay Jones. And from there, we ended up checking out some of their favorites, like Little Bobbins is another favorite of ours with Danny and Bobbin, her sweet little chihuahua. Also the Homespun House and Tilly Trout, and some other wonderful ones as well. Kristen with the Yarngasm podcast. But all of these podcasts they're longer than a lot of the podcasts that I've seen. They're a little more leisurely, but not in a way that you get bored. And I just love having that window into other creative lives. And some of them do things besides knitting. They spin or they crochet or other things as well. And it just reminded me of how there's a lot of creative things that I've really wanted to incorporate into my life. But I've always felt for a long time like, because I'm a writer, I had to keep my focus on writing. And I sometimes ended up feeling guilty if I wanted to spend time knitting or sewing or doing anything else that took time away from writing. And I've realized the last few years that that's really not something that has to be the case, that you can have a really holistic creative life that incorporates all of the different things that you love to do, and maybe in different proportions at different times. Maybe sometimes you do more writing than others, sometimes you do more knitting than others, but you find a balance that works for you. It's not what someone else says works for you. It's not what the latest writing how-to book says should work for you. And so this podcast, for the time being anyway, it's just to kind of chronicle my journey, I guess, figuring out how to create a more holistic life in terms of creativity. And I would love to share that with you and hear some of your views on it as we go along too. I would love to hear about what you get up to. But there's also going to be a clickable table of contents with each episode, both at the beginning of the episode and also in the show notes, which will be over at my blog. But just so that if you are just interested in writing or just interested in knitting, or you only have time for so much in a day, you'll be able to click just to the part you want. Because I want to make sure this is a fun, relaxing experience for you too. So that being said, I would love to start by talking about writing. And when I was thinking about this and how I wanted to make writing a big part of my podcast, I was thinking about the fact that freaked me out a little bit, because I'm one of those writers that I'm very reluctant to talk about what I'm working on at the time, before it's ready to be seen by other people. It's not that I think that all writers should do that, but it's just what works for me. I tend to keep it pretty close to the chest and just talk about it to a few people at a time. So I kind of wondered, okay, I'm going to be talking about writing on this podcast, but how am I going to do that? Aren't people going to think I'm a fraud if I don't talk about my own writing and what I'm doing? But then I realized that I'm so tired of the shoulds that crop up around writing and the sense of guilt on what you should be doing, or people will think you're a fraud. And I realized that there's a lot to be said about writing besides what you're working on. You can still talk about the process. You can still talk about things you come up against without talking about specifics. And that doesn't mean that I'll never talk about my work in progress. And there's actually something that I'm kind of interested in talking about today, because I would love to kind of see if you've come across anything similar. I'm sure you probably have. And what that is in my work in progress right now, it's something that when I first got the idea, it was very it was a very dark concept, not in terms of being like Lord of the Rings, good versus evil kind of thing, but in terms of just that the characters went to a very dark place in some ways. And as I've been writing it, and I write relatively slowly, I tend to have some bouts of I can write 10,000 words in a weekend, but normally I'm at a much slower, more consistent pace, which is fine with me. But I found over time, the last while that I've been working on it, it has shifted a bit and it's not quite as dark anymore. It still really delves into some very intense human emotions, but it's not going to as dark a place anymore. And the thing that I've kind of been wondering about is the fact that I don't know if I've shied away from going darker because I don't want to push my characters that far, or if it's a case of just that's the way that the story actually wants and needs to go. And I would love to know if you've come across that before. Like, what is your sense of when and how you can know the difference between when you're scared to push your characters to dark depths versus that's just the way your story wants to go? It's maybe a little bit lighter than you originally thought. And my feeling is that it's the latter, that it's just the way the story actually wants to go. It's still intense, but it's not quite as dark. And I'll probably free write about that a little bit and kind of have some conversations with my characters and see what they think. But I would love to know if you've come across stuff like that before with works in progress and how you ended up knowing the difference between what a story needed to be versus where it was just your fear of going to certain places with these characters that maybe you're fond of or you just don't want to push them that far. My work in progress is also largely based behind the scenes of a play. It's not all set at the theater, but that's one of the main things that's going on is they're working on a play and putting on a play. And the main characters work behind the scenes rather than on stage. And I've done both, not a lot, a few years quite intensely, and then I dropped it. But I have some very good memories of it. And that's a lot of the experiences that I'm drawing on and extrapolating from for the book, and then putting them in entirely different situations. But what I want to make sure is that I'm exploring a real intensity from that behind the stage experience. But I also want to make sure that I'm getting details in there of what I loved and still love about theater, because it is amazing. And there was a brief period where I did feel like I wanted to continue doing it as a big part of my life for a long time. And so I want to make sure that my love for that is still getting in there and that I'm getting in those details. So that's something I want to keep in mind going forward. And it actually reminds me of a movie that I saw recently. I went to see Brooklyn, the historical drama with Siobhan Ronan. I think that's how you say her name. But about an Irish immigrant in I think the 1950s to New York. And I was reading afterwards about some of the behind the scenes of putting the movie together. And number one, just their attention to detail with the wardrobe was fascinating because they didn't just go by what you would have seen in magazines and stuff at the time. They went by what someone who was an immigrant at the time would have had. She would have had a very limited wardrobe. She would have had one coat that she had had and repaired for years. And they also, so she ended up re-wearing a similar outfit during various points in the film, which was really interesting. And I didn't notice that as I was watching, but when I thought back and when I was looking at stills from scenes afterwards, I realized that, yeah, that was the same outfit. It was just maybe had a sweater over it instead, or she quite often had the same shoes and they weren't really high heels because the heels could break and it was expensive to repair, and so they quite often wore flats or just really short pumps. And so that attention to detail was amazing. But also something that I thought was a really good takeaway for historical fiction writers was what the actor who played Tony, I don't want to give too many spoilers, but the fellow in New York that she meets and carries on with for a while. But something that the actor who played him said, and I can't remember his name offhand, But someone asked him what it was like playing a character from the 1950s, and he said that you had to not think of it that way. You have to think of it as just you're playing a character. Because if you start thinking of it as that, oh, I'm playing someone from the 1950s, how would that person act? You almost get more of a caricature of what someone from the 1950s is supposed to be like. And I thought that was a really good note for historical fiction writers too, is that if we write about what we think the 1950s or 1920s or whatever it was supposed to be like, then, or what we think based off of just what we've seen in movies or TV shows, and some of which might, or books that some of which might have been better researched than others. But if we go off of what our perceptions of it should be, rather than really diving in and doing our own research and kind of pushing past first appearances, then we can get a sense more that we're playing at what the era should have been like rather than what it was actually like. So I thought that was a really neat note, because I write historical fiction as well as contemporary and fantasy, and that's something that I definitely want to keep in mind next time I go back to that. And also, this is more of a crafty note than a writing note, but I'm going to slip it in here anyway. Watching Brooklyn, there were so many things in that movie that I wanted to knit afterwards or sew. And I even ended up looking at some fabric in my stash afterwards and thinking, and a skirt that I had that I didn't make, but I just got from Value Village, I think. And I was looking at it and I was just realizing how the style was very similar to one from the movie. And I was looking at some fabric that I had that's very drapey and a bit heavier and gorgeous, and realizing that I could actually create a pattern from that skirt and use that fabric and create something very similar to one of the outfits from the movie. So I'm really excited about that, and I'll keep you updated on that in future episodes in the crafty section. So stay tuned. Just taking a break from my constant knitting for a second, because I actually want to move on to showing you some books that I've been reading. I'm just going to take a sip of tea first. That's so good. I'm actually still drinking Christmas tea. This is a blend from a local tea shop we have called Murchie's, and they have this Christmas blend tea. Let's see if that'll focus. There we go. And it's a black tea, but it's just got some gorgeous spices in it. Rich black teas blended with orange peel, cinnamon, cloves, and vanilla. And it's nice because it's got a bit of a, not a bite, but it's definitely got a hint of those spices, and then the vanilla really kind of mellows it out, which is nice. And I would happily drink this all year long, but I love when you open the tin and you just smell the scent waft up from all the tea bags or the tea leaves if you get the loose. It's amazing. It's just a little taste of Christmas all year round. Mm. Mm. Oh, one more thing actually I realized I forgot to mention before we move too far away from writing. Another thing that I've been doing lately is going through a lot of my old writing files. I haven't touched my paper ones yet because they aren't, well, they take more physical room than the stuff on the computer. I don't have nearly as much of it as the virtual clutter. And in terms of virtual clutter, as far as my writing goes, I basically have had at this point, I had every single writing file that I had ever created, basically since I started writing on the computer, which is, I think the earliest file was back in 2001. So that's about, yeah, that's 14 years now, almost 15 years based on the date from the last one. So it was a little insane, and I've kind of let it go for a while because I just thought, oh, it's not bothering me, it's just sitting there. But that was kind of the problem, is it was just sitting there and the old stuff was mixed in with the newer stuff, and it was kind of overwhelming. And sometimes there are some stories I have that have gone through an evolution over time, and so I have a lot of old files and new files for those projects, and it was just starting to feel like it was making things stagnant. So I've been going through those a lot lately, and I'm actually working on a blog post series about it as well, because I think this is something that a lot of us probably struggle with, but it's fun. I've actually been able to pull out one of my favorite books to help me with it. And this book is one that I've had since I was a teenager, and it's really helped me with organizing stuff a lot. And so I'm using it again. It's Organizing from the Inside Out for teens. And it's written by Julie Morgenstern and co-written with her daughter, Jessie Morgenstern. And Julie Morgenstern, the mom, actually wrote Organizing from the Inside Out first. And it has to be the best organizing philosophy I have ever found, because she's not about pushing her own ideas on you. She's about really figuring out a system that works for you, because she really believes that some people do work well having a little bit of cozy clutter, and other people work well having things really minimalist, and other people work well somewhere in the middle. And so she's not about, okay, you have to use this system and that's the only one you can use, or you're just going to clutter up everything and that's it. She's just really about personalizing and figuring out a system that works for you, and then that's the one that you're going to be able to maintain over time. And so I've used this a lot, and I'm using some of her same principles now for going through my virtual clutter. So if you do struggle with organization, I highly recommend that book, whether it's electronic stuff or physical stuff. She also talks about organizing your time. It's really amazing. That book that I just held up is great for teenagers. It's really on point and awesome. Her one for adults is really good too. She's also got a more recent one called Shed Your Stuff, which is also really good. But yeah, I would definitely check her out if some of the organizing philosophies you've found before have felt a bit too strict for you, or like they just don't work. I'd highly recommend that. So that's one of the books that's been out for me recently. But in terms of fiction, what I've been reading has been The Epic Adventures of Lydia Bennet, and I've got a bit of a screen glare there. Yeah, this is based on, it's a sequel to the web series, The Lizzie Bennet Diaries, which was based on Pride and Prejudice, and which was amazing. I loved it, and if you haven't watched it yet, I highly recommend it. But they brought out, after the series was over, they brought out a diary, a book version that was set during the course of the video series, and it was written from Lizzie's point of view. So you got to see some behind the scenes of her life that didn't come up during the video series, which was really interesting, and also just get a different perspective on it. And so this one came out more recently, but it's about Lizzie Bennet's younger sister, Lydia, and it actually takes place after the series and the diary. And it's really interesting because Lydia is a character that in Pride and Prejudice, if you've read the book or know the story at all, Lydia is the sister that ends up running off with Mr. Wickham and getting in all sorts of trouble, and Mr. Darcy ends up having to sort things out and keep her from completely shaming the family and etc. But they turned her into very fascinating character in the video diaries. They turned her into someone who was still very flighty and had some things to work through, but they actually got her working through them throughout the course of the video series. And so at the end, by the time the series was over, there was a hint that she was starting to grow up a little bit, and it was actually really interesting to see that. And I think there were a lot of people, myself included, that kind of wanted to know, okay, but what happened to Lydia afterwards? What did she go on to do? People got very invested in that, which was really cool. And so having this book, The Epic Adventures of Lydia Bennet, is just a really fun chance to see what she went on to do. So I'm not very far into it. I think I'm about maybe about 50 pages in or something like that. It's very readable. I really enjoy it. If you liked I wouldn't read it on its own if you haven't seen the video series on YouTube, then it's probably not going to hit you the right way. But if you have watched the video series, I would definitely recommend it, especially if you got invested in Lydia's journey. It's really interesting to see what's happening to her afterwards as she's figuring her life out. Okay, so the last book I'm going to talk about today, I have a couple others that I'm reading right now, but I don't want the section to go on too long. So I have been reading the Betsy Tacy series by Maud Hart Lovelace. And I thought that the first time I heard about this series was in the Mother-Daughter Book Club series by Heather Vogel Frederick, which is another awesome series for middle grade. I definitely recommend it. And I thought, because this was one of the series that they read during the course of those books, that felt like the first time I had ever heard of it. And I really wanted to read it and went on to find the first two, and then got this one from my mom for Christmas. And so it was really nice to be able to carry on reading the series, because there's 10 books in all, I think. And if you don't know the story, they were written in the 1940s, and Maud Hart Lovelace set them during the early 1900s when she was a kid. And the series actually follows Betsy as she grows up, so from when she's under 10 years old through to when she eventually gets married. And it's an amazing series. You may have seen me talk about it on Instagram or Twitter before. It is incredible. I love it. It's not just for kids. This is absolutely for adults too. And one of the things I love about it is just how authentic it is. If this series doesn't remind you what it's like to be a child, it's incredible. I mean, like, this one is called Betsy and Tacy Go Downtown, and one of the lines in it is about just how exciting going downtown can be, because they're just 12 in this book, because when you're 12, it's just things like that are so exciting because you don't do that on your own. You've never been able to do that before. But at 12, they're finally able to start doing that. And, you remember that excitement of when you were first allowed to start going places on your own or doing things with your friends on your own. And it's just, I love that connection with a time that you remember. It really helps you connect to the story. So I love that as a reader and a writer. I absolutely love that. So I would highly recommend this series. But just a fun thing for me was the fact that it turned out that the first time I heard about it was not in the Mother-Daughter Book Club series. It was actually in the movie You've Got Mail. Because if you've seen that, you might remember the scene where Kathleen Kelly, played by Meg Ryan, is talking to Tom Hanks' character's, it's his aunt, because it's a very interesting family, but she's quite young, Annabelle. And so Kathleen Kelly is telling Annabelle in the bookstore about a series with characters called Betsy, Tacy, and Tib. And it wasn't until recently that I realized that that was these books. And I have been watching that movie probably since it came out. I remember seeing it when I was quite young. And so it was really cool to actually realize that I had been hearing about this series forever, and I just didn't realize it. I think I always thought that series was made up. Or she also talks about the Noel Streatfeild books, Ballet Shoes, etc., in that movie. And so I think I kind of confused the two, and I remembered the Ballet Shoes and not this series. And anyway, so that was just a really cool connection. I love finding those things where you just realize that you actually heard about something a long time ago and you're just getting a chance to read it now. It feels like kind of a neat synchronicity kind of thing. If you've read the Betsy Tacy series, I would love to hear what you think. Like I said, I'm on book 3 right now. Or is this? No, my mistake. I think this is actually book 4. Betsy and Tacy Go Downtown is book 4. And then there's 6 more after that. So if you've read this series, I would love to hear what you thought, because I just think it's amazing. Or if you have suggestions for any others that are similar, I would love to hear that as well. So moving on to crafty things, I really like the format that a lot of knitting podcasters are using, where they divide it up and they talk about their things in progress, they talk about their finished objects, and then they talk about, I love what Danny on Little Bombers calls it. She calls them lovely things, things that she's been given or bought in the crafty realm. So I'm probably going to follow something similar and show my in progress things first. So because I've got this with me and I've been knitting on it, I may as well show you this first. So don't start knitting on it, Victoria. That would be a bad idea. It's going to be hard to show. So this is a sock, and it is a worsted weight sock with a contrast heel, and it's going to have a contrast toe as well. And because it's in worsted weight, I'm doing it on a bigger needle as well than I normally would. I'm doing it on Magic Loop, on my 3.75 millimeter Knitter's Pride Dreams, and I love these needles. These are my go-to needles for so many things for knitting. And they're made of birch, and which is really nice because the wooden needles are really nice in my hands because I find my hands get quite tense, and so I tend to not be able to knit as much as I would like, and the wood is a lot easier on them. But working with bamboo, I have found is too grippy, but the birch is just amazing, and they've got a gorgeous finish. I absolutely love them. So, and it's a really good price. I got the interchangeable set for about $80, I think, Canadian. And that has served me well for so many projects, and really good price and really nice for magic looping, and it's fantastic. I actually finally went out and bought some extra cords because the nice thing about interchangeables is you can just switch out the needle tips. And so I wanted more cords to be able to just keep them on cords and switch the needle tips around. And so I think I bought a 24-inch to 30 inches. Is that right? 32 inches. And one 40-inch. Because I do a fair bit of magic loop, and that'll work for a sweater as well. But yeah, this is a worsted weight sock. I'm a little bit making up my own pattern for it. But I'm also using this book, Getting Started Knitting Socks by Anne Budd, because she's got a recipe, basically, for worsted weight socks, which has been awesome. And it's got really good instructions on sizing as well, which is good because I'm actually not making these for me. I'm making these for my boyfriend, who is 6'5", and so you can imagine that the sizing would be slightly different. And he's also not here, so I can't check the sizing on him. But anyway, I am loving doing this sock. It is so much fun. This is my first time doing a worsted weight sock, and I only just started doing socks in general a couple months ago, but this goes up so fast. I started this last night. I've probably worked about 4 or 5 hours on this in total, if that, and I'm past the cuff. I did a 2x2 twisted rib, and I did a twisted German cast on because I really like that for the rebound it gives, and it just kind of looks quite tidy as well. And I did a Eye of Partridge heel, which you're not really going to be able to see unless I show you on the inside. No, it's going to be a bit awkward. Never mind. I'll show you when I'm done. But this is the first sock, and so I'm on to the foot now, which is very exciting. And so that's that, and I am doing that in which yarn? Let me just grab it. It's right here. So it is Diamond Luxury Collection, and it's pure wool superwash, 100%. And this is really lovely to work with. It just kind of feels plump and nice, and it's machine washable. And I'm doing, the purple is also the same wool, just a different colorway, obviously. So I'm doing his pair of socks with the main color gray and purple for the heel and toe, and then I'm going to do the opposite for a pair of socks for me with the leftovers. So that'll be fun. And what else do I have in progress? I have more socks. I have this sock, which I love. I love these colors. They're amazing. And that's actually a pretty good representation of the colors, so that makes me happy. I love how the heel worked out. And this is just basically a vanilla sock. It's got 1x1 twisted rib and then just knitting plain, and I did the Eye of Partridge heel. And working my way down the foot, and it's actually quite ridiculous that this sock is not off the needles yet because it has been like this for a couple weeks, probably. I have to knit one more row and Kitchener the toe. that is literally all I have left on this sock. So why I haven't done it yet, I don't know. Part of the reason I'm looking forward to doing this podcast is selfishly I'm looking forward to kind of shaming myself into getting stuff like this done, because if this was still not done the next time I podcasted, that would be a little bit embarrassing. So this is going to be done next time you see it, and maybe I'll even have the second one done. That would be awesome. But I love this yarn. It is Opal, the sweet and spicy line. I think I have the label. Oh, here, I've got another ball of it. So yeah, it's the Opal Sweet and Spicy, which is just lovely. I think it's discontinued, sadly. And so whenever Mom or I, because we both love this colorway, whenever we see it in the store, we have a tendency to buy it because it's amazing. And yeah, but it's the chili colorway, and it's just fantastic. So if you see a ball of this, definitely get some and try it because it is beautiful. And it feels so nice and scrumptious. And, oh, I forgot to say what I was knitting that on. So I am using, this was new for me actually, I had to, because I wanted to have 2 pairs of socks on the go at a time, I had to go out and get some needles. So I got some 2.5 Addy sock brackets, which are just lovely, and I don't know if you can see the point, how pointy they are. But they're the pointiest needle that I have worked with, and it makes a huge difference for the SSK and Knit 2 Together, especially the Knit 2 Together. It is amazing. I mean, I can't wait to actually try these on a shawl. It's going to be fantastic. Anything involving lace or something like that, I can't wait. But yeah, so these are fixed, not interchangeable. And it is I believe a 40-inch, which is really nice, I find, for Magic Loop. Yeah, so that's those. And I also have another pair of socks on the go. And this is the Hermione's Everyday. I actually have a full sock of this one. This is and I don't have sock blockers. It's something that's actually on my list to get this year, so it's going to be a little hard to see socks until then, but I hope you like it anyway. This is the Hermione's Everyday pattern, and I'm hoping you can see kind of how you can get a sense of how it's knitting up. And the Hermione's Everyday sock is a free pattern by Erica Luder, I think. And it is a wonderful pattern. These are the first socks. They're still in progress, but it's the first sock I ever made. And I love it. I did a 1x1 twisted rib, which is slightly different from the pattern. And I believe I think I might have done a long tail cast on this one. And then rather than doing the modified Eye of Partridge heel, which is the same as the Eye of Partridge, but you have garter stitch on the edge, I just did a normal Eye of Partridge heel at the back, which I really like how that turned out. It's really sweet in those colors. And then just carried on the pattern down to the toe. And I did the toe as in the pattern. I would highly recommend this pattern if you are just getting started with knitting socks. It's all explained really well, and I really like it. Highly recommend it. And I actually have this much of the second one done, which is just lovely. I really enjoy this pattern, and I love how this pattern shows off variegated yarn too. I don't know, variegated yarn quite often I find looks better in a plain pattern, but the Hermione's Everyday just gives it a really nice texture, and I just love how it shows it off. And so these I'm actually doing on 2.5 millimeter carbons, and again fixed, not interchangeable. But these are really lovely. I actually really like the carbons and the way they feel in my hands. I very much got away from using needles that were metal because I was finding them really hard on my hands, and I was having to severely limit my knitting time. Because I have kind of a middling tension, but I don't know what it is. I have a weird habit of tensing my hand as I do things, and it was just adding a lot of tension when I was knitting, and so I really needed that different needle and not using metal. But these have been wonderful, and I'm really impressed with them. So if you haven't tried them, I would give carbons a try. They're fantastic and they feel really nice. There's not too much drag, although I know some people find that not to be the case. So give them a try if you're not sure. They're worth a try nonetheless. So what else? So I've also been working on, because I've been doing a lot of fingering weight projects, and this was before I started the worsted weight socks. I really wanted something just a little thicker and cushier on my needles to kind of trade off with. And I had this yarn, which I can't remember what it is offhand, but I know I have it written down, so I will put just a little bit of text below here in editing to tell you what it is. But I've used it before for hats and other things, book covers. It's incredibly squishy and I love it. It's got a really nice, it's bulky weight. It's got just kind of a nice twist to it. I don't know if that's gonna focus or not. Okay. There we go. So it's got a nice twist to it, and it's kind of got the lighter color mixed with the denim blue, which is just gorgeous. And so because I knew it worked out nicely, I decided to finally give the Axel fingerless mitts a go. And I have enjoyed this pattern. I like the way it ends up. It's a free pattern on Ravelry, so I would suggest giving it a try. I've got one mitten basically done. I just have to sew in the ends on it, and then I have to do the other one. I'll just show it to you. Please ignore my copious ends. That's what it looks like folded over. It's got that nice, the cable in there, and then the twists coming up. Just a really nice pattern, and then you can make it come up over your fingertips for a bit more warmth. Ends, which is nice. I like having that option, and it folds down really easily. So like I was saying, I like this pattern. I really like what you end up with. It is something that it's not necessarily written in the most intuitive manner in the world. You do have to kind of read the pattern and puzzle out a bit what it wants you to do when. I'm almost tempted to, for myself, just rewrite the pattern a little bit so that it's written out a bit more sequentially, and so that like when it tells you to cast on the gusset stitches, that it's a little more clear when it says to do that and when to do what. But it really is a nice pattern. I really like it. It's very comfortable. It's a good fit. I don't have a tiny hand because I'm quite tall and broad-shouldered. I don't know if you can tell, but so I don't have super tiny hands, but they're about, what was the measurement? I think mine are about 7 1/4 inch around here. If that gives you an idea for a measurement, I think some mitts and gloves kind of do a measurement of 7.5 for a woman's. Anyway, I didn't find that I had to modify the pattern at all. I did the stitch count that it suggests, 28 stitches. I did the size it suggested. What size is it for a needle? I will get back to you. I will put a little note below of what needle I used. I know I used Knitter's Pride Dreams. I just can't remember what size right now. But yeah, I really like these, and it actually amuses me how thin they look when you just have them like that, because what it is, there's the rib on the palm, and that's what stretches out and really makes it fit. You carry the rib all the way up. Just show you. Just carry the rib the whole way. One other modification that I did for these is my ribbing, the knit stitches tend to be very untidy. It doesn't matter what my tension is like, so I pretty much always default to a twisted rib because that makes them equivalent to your average rib stitch for me. They look a bit tidier. So yeah, and that didn't seem to affect the sizing negatively at all for me. I will say if your hand is any bigger than that 7 1/4, I think I said, then it might start to get a bit tight, and so you might want to add a few stitches. But other than that, I really enjoyed it. It's a really fun pattern. I normally, when I do gloves or mittens and I'm picking up stitches for the thumb, I normally pick up a few extra stitches here, but it actually tells you to do that in the pattern, and so I didn't end up with any holes, which was fantastic. That's one of the first times that has happened for me with a glove or a mitten pattern as written, so I was impressed with that. That's awesome. So I just have to sew in the ends on this and do a second one, and they take no time at all, and it's so much fun. I love it once you understand the pattern and what it's asking you to do. So I would recommend checking out that pattern. It's the Axel fingerless mitts, and it's free on Ravelry, so definitely give it a go. Speaking of fingerless gloves, I also have a belated Christmas gift, and I'm making gloves for my mom, fingerless gloves for my mom, and it is the, what pattern is it? Oh, joy, it's the cupcake mittlets, and they're really sweet. I'll just put this on quickly so you can see. This one isn't done yet, but it's got a really sweet pattern in the hand, and it carries on to, can I show you? The thumb is just plain, but the pattern is on the front and back. Some people have just done it on the front, which is fine. And then it's just a little bit of rib at the top and the bottom, which is nice. And so those are lovely, and I made these for someone else a few years ago and hadn't made them since, but I knew I liked the pattern. It's just kind of very simple to follow, and it reverses it, I believe, for left and right, or gives you the option to reverse it. I could be wrong on that, but I think that's true. But what I really love with this is I love the yarn. The pattern is fantastic, but the yarn I think just makes it. And it is, there's the ball I'm working from right now. It's a gorgeous periwinkle color on the blue-gray side. And it is Wool Gatto by Lana Gatto. And it is a DK weight. And I don't think you can get this anymore. I got it quite a while ago. The colorway is Wedgwood Blue, so you might be able to find it in a D-stash somewhere. But I absolutely love it. It is made in Italy. Sadly, I didn't get it in Italy. But yeah, it's just beautiful. I'm really pleased with it. It feels really nice. It doesn't feel scratchy. It feels very soft and warm. And it has really nice stitch definition. I love that. And yeah, so I just have this one done, and I have to just add the thumb. And I'm going to redo the cast off as well, because it's just a tiny bit tight. So I'm going to redo that, and I did my twisted rib again. That's that. And I also have, now this is another one of those projects that I am trying to shame myself into finishing. It is the Susie Rogers reading mitts. And I made some modifications, but I'll show you what this looks like first. This is so close to being done, I just have to finish the thumbs. It's crazy. This one, technically the thumb is done, but it's a bit tight, so I'm going to redo a bit of it. But it is beautiful. I love this pattern. Part of my joy of this is the yarn too, but it is amazing. I highly recommend this pattern. It's free on Ravelry. I did make some modifications in that in the original pattern, there's a picot edging on the top and bottom. And I did modify it to take that off, which is pretty easy to do. So if you want to do that, it's not hard. The one thing is that at the bottom, having that many stitches made it quite rolly. And so I think what I'm going to do, I might either pick up some stitches there and just knit around to pull it in tighter, like in a smaller needle size, or I might just crochet a little thing around there to make it not quite so rolly. And I have to do that on the other one as well. But I love this yarn. This is Tanis Fiber Arts, who I believe is based in Quebec, but I picked up some of this yarn in Vancouver when my mom and grandma and I were there to see the Vanier Cup, which is the university football, a few years back. And this is the shadow colorway, which is just amazing. But one of the things that I love about Tanis, and this is also one of the things that can drive you nuts too, is that the dye lots tend to be very different. And you can't tell because of the way I did this, but this is actually made from 2 different dye lots, one of which had a lot more blue in it. If you can see like the bits of light blue in there. Yeah, kind of in there. And one of them had a lot more of the gray. And I was a little worried that, because one skein had been used for a cowl and one had been used for a hat, so I had leftovers of both. And I really wanted to make these gloves out of it because they're beautiful, and the yarn is amazing to work with. It's so squishy and lovely. But I was worried that I was going to end up with something very, kind of a strange effect, and I wanted them to look relatively similar. So I knew I had more of one than the other, so I weighed both of them and divided that in half, and I carried on until, from the cast on up through until I'd used up half of the bigger ball, and then I switched to the other skein for probably about here up to the top, and then I can't remember which one I used for the thumbs, but this is basically all I have left. So that'll be enough for, come on, you can focus. There we go. That's basically what I have left. And I think it is the, in the Tanis Fiber Arts, it's the green label, which is their Aran weight, but it actually knits up closer to a worsted or even a DK, I think, which I think the Susie Rogers Reading Mitts is written for DK. So I found it worked really well for the pattern. I don't believe I had to modify the stitch count at all. And I love the architecturalness of this. It looks like Roman columns or something like that. It's just beautiful. So, and I'll block these out too, which will help even it up a little bit, but I love those. So if you can get a hold of some Tanis Fiber Arts, I highly recommend it. It's well worth it. So on to finished objects, or virtually finished objects in 1 or 2 cases. I have, this is it's a Ricky hat. So it's exactly like what I'm wearing, which I'm not going to take mine off right now to show you because I really need it on right now. I'm a bit cold and it's one of those days with my hair. But they're made from the same yarn, different colorways. It's Minehouse Woolville, and it's not quite showing up right on the screen, but this is like a gorgeous plummy color and royal purple and little bits of lighter bits in there and just gorgeous. So mine, I had gone down with the stitch count to 96 stitches, but this is for my boyfriend who has a slightly bigger head than I do. So I went with the original stitch count of 104, I believe it is. And other than that, I did the same things as I did with mine. I didn't go to the full 9 inches from the beginning. I did either 7.5 or 8 inches. I think I did 8 inches before starting the decreases. And that worked out really well. I did not have too much yarn left. I think I had just a small ball about this big. But that was actually, I love working on the Ricky hat. I didn't used to like doing garter stitch. I wasn't a huge fan of purling, but at this point I get into a good rhythm with it, and so I actually really liked the knit 1 row, purl 1 row, etc. And I got done quite quickly because it was just very like mindless knitting for me. And this wool is so squishy and lovely to work with too, and I think, yeah, I love the colors, how it works up. And so that is that. And that, I believe I did the needle size is it's suggested. I did a 3.5 millimeter and for the part at the beginning, and then I did a 4.5 millimeter for the rest. And for 3.5 millimeter, I didn't have the right length for what I wanted. My magic looping lengths were all in use, and I didn't have a circular the right size, so I actually just went back and forth, and then I seamed that bit at the end. But once I got to the 4.5, you're supposed to go on a bigger needle length anyway. So at that point I had the right size. So yay. Yeah, so really pleased with how that turned out. He loves purple, so I think he's gonna like that. And other finished object is a blue bird of happiness. It's so sweet. I love this. It's showing up a lot brighter on screen. It's not actually that bright blue. It's a Madeline Tosh, more of a sea blue, I guess. But yeah, it's really sweet. And I love this pattern. I don't know if you can see the detailing on just the wing and just how it sits and the little tail. Oh, it's just so cute. I love this. I think the first time I saw this was on the Yarngasm podcast. Kristen was making a bunch of them, and then I just had to because they were just so cute. And so yeah, this was a little bit of Madeline Tosh that I had in worsted weight. And speaking of that, this is also one of my almost but not quite finished objects, but I'm going to show it to you anyway. Okay, stand up straight. There you go. Squeak! There's a sweet little mouse. And a little tail. And yes, she has a hood, a little pointed hood, and a little bell. It does ring. I hope you can hear that. But so I still want to give her some eyes because I think that'll just finish her off nicely. But this is actually one of those projects that I've been wanting to make for years. It's called where is it now? I've got it here. It's the Holiday Mouse pattern, Holiday Mice pattern. Here we go. Holiday Mice by Fuzzy Mittens. And I've actually had it in my queue for several years now because my mom loves little mice, especially ones that talk. And this one just looks like she's got a lot of character and like she's got a lot of stories to tell. So I've been wanting to make this for my mom for years, and this year I finally did. And I actually used more of the Madeline Tosh for the little hood because it's going to be on her head. She has to have a nice quality yarn, doesn't she? But I love the construction of the hood, how it's got this little brim around here and the way it goes up. It's just so sweet. So yeah, and the construction with this pattern is awesome. Like I love how the little feet and paws are actually baubles. You don't sew those on afterwards, which is actually really nice. And this also shows how much I love my mom because I hate doing baubles. I had to do them for a project a few years back, and the yarn was not a very good choice for it, and it was just awful. It was splitty and drove me nuts, and it has kind of ruined me for baubles ever since. But I had to do this pattern, so I persevered and I did the baubles, and there was only 4, so they weren't that bad, and they work really well. So yeah, I would highly recommend this pattern. I believe it's a free pattern on Ravelry, but I would highly recommend it. It gives instructions for the hood and another hat option in there as well, a little beret, which is really sweet and cute. So I would definitely recommend that. It's very sweet. And one thing I was going to say is that the body of the mouse and the head is made from a Karen Simply Soft, I think, in worsted weight. And so it's actually not my favorite yarn, and that's something I'm going to talk about in a minute. But for this mouse, it actually turned out really well because this yarn pills quite a bit, but for a little mouse that's going to sit there and be adorable, I think it's going to be fine. Absolutely fine. So one of the last things I wanted to talk about that's knitting related is scrumptious things, lovely things, yarn related. I don't have the biggest yarn budget in the world, and so I tend to very slowly add to my stash, and I use sales a lot, and I've kind of moved on for the most part from yarns that you can get at Michael's and stuff like that, although some of them are still nice and still have their place for toys and stuff. But I tend to go for mid-range yarns at this point. I love supporting indie dyers when I can. But anyway, I did, Christmas just happened, so um, I did treat myself a little bit to a couple of things. Um, and I also did get some wonderful yarny Christmas presents, which I will show you next time. The two things that I got for myself, I got this gorgeous yarn, and I'm hoping that the colors are going to show up properly. There's actually, I don't think it's showing up, but there's actually some turquoise more so in there than bright blue. There's some turquoise and green and just some gorgeous like brown flecks. Oh, it's actually showing better from here. But so that is the, I'm probably not going to pronounce this right, but it's the Magdalena Nunair. And it's a bulky, extra bulky Solana Grossa. And I have actually used this for, sorry, my monitor just did a weird thing. I have actually used this for a cowl before in a different colorway, but the same yarn. I used it for the drop stitch cowl, and it made the most amazing cowl. I did it in a colorway that was red and orange and yellow. It was just beautiful. And that was a gift for someone else. And so I really wanted one for myself because I've made a drop stitch cowl for myself before, and it's one of my favorites. So I wanted to give this a go for me. So this is going to be a drop stitch cowl, which I will hopefully have on the needles soon. And I also have this Ancient Arts yarn, which is, oh, that's actually showing up quite well. And it's fingering weight, and it is in the West Coast Waterfall colorway. This is their 3-ply merino and nylon. It's 80% merino, 20% nylon. And I picked this up at my local wool store. They have a whole wall of the Ancient Arts yarns, and I probably want 2/3 of the colorways on that wall. They are incredible. They also have a lot of colorways that are based on specific animal breeds, like dog and cat breeds, and some of the proceeds from those sales go to a local shelter, I believe, which I think is fantastic. But this is just, the colors are so rich and amazing, and I haven't decided yet what to make from this. I think it's probably going to be a shawl. I'm tempted to make another Ishbel from it because you can't really see it, but this is my other Ishbel that I made. And I loved working on that pattern. It was just amazing. So I think this has to not be socks. I think this has to be something that can stay around my face. Because I want to be able to look down at it and pet it a lot, and that's a little further away when it socks. So I think that's what that's going to be. If you've ever knit with this, I would love to hear how it turned out, because there's not a lot of comments on Ravelry about it. The couple of people that I did find did really like it, so I'm going to give it a try. But yeah, I'm really excited about that. So if you've knit with that, let me know. I would love to hear how it turned out. So the last thing I'm going to show you today in the crafty realm is actually sewing related. And this is another case of I'm trying to shame myself into finishing it because it's been this close to done for a long time. So this is try and show it all to you here. This is a half circle skirt, and it's made in, this is a wool blend fabric, and it just feels really nice. I love the pattern on it. Show you up close. Just gorgeous. And I'm making it from a tutorial by Annika on YouTube. She's a wonderfully talented girl from Australia who does free DIY sewing videos. And they are just incredible. And I took sewing lessons when I was younger, and they were really good. I had a really good teacher, but I kind of dropped away from it for a long time and was not scared of the sewing machine, but I just didn't feel terribly confident with it. And then I started slowly picking it up again. And then I found Annika's videos probably about a year ago, and I got addicted because the way she explains things is just so helpful. It makes you feel like, yeah, I can do that. And then you go out and you actually do it and you end up with something that actually looks beautiful. So I have made a skirt from her tutorial before, so this is a new one for me. But this is so close to being done. And I'm really pleased with how the waistband turned out. I don't know if you can see, but I just like how tidy that is. I'm pleased. But the one thing that's not done is I put in a zipper. But you'll see it is not really attached. And so this part is all kind of unfinished, but that is quite literally the only thing on this skirt that still has to be done. I hemmed the entire hem of this skirt. Everything else is done, and so I just need to properly put the zipper in. The reason that I haven't done it yet is that I did it at the time and I did it badly, in that the edges of the fabric kind of were coming out and fraying, and it wasn't very good, and so it wasn't attached as much as I wanted it to be, and you could see the zipper through part of it and blah blah blah. So I took it out, but I was kind of sad that I hadn't been able to get it done in one go, which is kind of my MO with sewing. I like to kind of charge through it and keep the momentum going, because otherwise I know I might not get back to it for a little while. And this has actually been months that this has been sitting undone. So I'm now showing it to you because I'm hoping that will motivate me to get it done, because I would actually love to wear this. I'm really excited, and I also want to get going on some other things, but more than anything, I really, really am excited to wear this skirt, and it's about time too. So that is it, and I would love to know if you've tried some of Annika's tutorials or if you've seen them before. She's a very sweet girl and very talented and a really good teacher. So I'd highly recommend, if you haven't seen her videos already, go check them out. So I believe that brings me to the end of everything I had to talk about. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. This was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed this. And I would love to hear what were some of maybe your favorite parts of the episode today. If there are things that you would like to see or hear more about in future episodes, let me know what you're knitting. If you saw the movie Brooklyn, what you thought. If you had any thoughts about the writing things I was mentioning earlier, or just general thoughts, just get in touch with me either in the YouTube comments or come find me on Twitter. I'll put the info below this episode or at the end of the video. And yeah, just come say hi and let me know what you thought. Okay, I hope you have a wonderful day, and may the spark be with you. Bye.